My name is David Mercer. I'm 42 years old. I work in structural engineering and live with my wife Claire and our two children, Max and Lily, in a beautiful home just outside the city. From the outside, we look like a picture of success, polished, composed, well put together, but what no one sees are the fractures beneath the surface. I grew up in a small working-class town in Ohio. My parents were factory workers. My sister teaches third grade. We never had much, but we had each other, loyalty, humility, and showing up for your people. Those were values I was raised with. I carried them with me into adulthood. Unfortunately, I married someone who saw those values as liabilities. Claire came from a different world. Her father is a retired CEO, her mother the type of woman who has a favorite florist and considers grocery shopping low vibe. I didn't mind the class differences at first. Claire was charming, elegant, ambitious. I admired her drive. She always had a vision for our careers, our children, our home, our future. And for a long time, I let her lead, thinking it was just her way of caring. But there's a line between having taste and having contempt, and I didn't realize we'd crossed it until last December. It was about 3 weeks before Christmas. We were finalizing plans for our annual holiday party, our biggest event of the year. Claire takes it very seriously. A professional decorator comes in, a catering team handles the menu, there's live jazz, curated wines, even valet. She'd been obsessing over the guest list for days. When I asked if she'd sent an invite to my parents and my sister, she didn't answer right away. Instead, she set down her tablet, folded her hands in her lap, and looked at me like she was about to deliver bad news. "David, I think it's better this year if your family doesn't come." At first I thought I misheard her. I laughed, a little confused. "What do you mean?" I asked. "They've come every year." She didn't blink. "I know, but this year is different. The Hunleys and the Walcotts will be here, people from the board. I don't want any awkward moments." I stared at her. "Claire, they're my family." That's when she said it. The words that would echo in my mind for weeks. "David, I'm sorry, but your family is low class. They're not on our level, and I won't have them ruining this night." There was no yelling, no dramatic confrontation, just silence. A cold, hollow kind of silence that wrapped itself around my chest and tightened with every second. My wife, the woman I'd built a life with, had just told me that my family, the people who raised me, weren't good enough to step foot in our home. I didn't argue. Not then. I just nodded slowly and excused myself, retreating to the garage where the tools didn't lie, where the air smelled of oil and truth, and where I could breathe. Later that night, I sat in the dark of our living room watching the twinkling lights of the Christmas tree flicker across the polished floors. I thought about my dad, who still gets up at 5 a.m. to walk my mom to the diner where she works part-time, even though she doesn't need to. I thought about my sister, who sends Max and Lily handwritten cards on every holiday, even Arbor Day. I thought about the simple kind of love I came from, the kind that didn't need chandeliers or imported wine to feel like home, and I realized something had shifted. A quiet crack had formed, and it wouldn't go away. The next morning, Claire acted as if nothing had happened. She hummed while choosing napkin colors and showed me photos of floral arrangements like she hadn't just dismissed my entire bloodline. I watched her move through our kitchen with perfect posture and rehearsed smiles, and something inside me started to harden. I didn't bring it up, not yet. I needed time, not to forgive, but to see clearly. That was the moment I began listening with different ears, watching with different eyes, because when someone shows you who they really are, the worst thing you can do is look away. I started thinking about the times she'd made subtle jabs before, Comments about my dad's accent, about how my sister's clothes weren't tailored, or how she didn't see why teachers needed summers off. I used to brush it off, call it dry humor or high standards. But now I saw it for what it was, contempt, dressed up as class. And the truth is, I'd enabled it. I had allowed it, one small silence at a time. But this time was different, because this time she wasn't just mocking them. She was cutting them out of our lives, and my children's lives too. Max and Lily loved their grandparents. My father had built them a wooden playhouse by hand last year, even though his back had been acting up. My mom always brought over her famous lemon squares, the ones Lily once said tasted like hugs. And my sister, she was the only one who ever showed up to Max's soccer games when we couldn't make it. These weren't people I could explain away as not on our level. These were my roots, my compass. The very reason I'd worked so hard in the first place to make them proud. I tried to picture telling them the truth. Telling my mom that her holiday blouse from Kohl's might embarrass my wife. Telling my dad he couldn't come because his hands were too rough from years of labor. Telling my sister to stay home because her laugh was too loud or her wine wasn't expensive enough. I couldn't do it. I wouldn't. But I also didn't want a scene. I didn't want my kids to remember this Christmas as the one when Mum and Dad fought over a guest list. So I told Claire I'd handle it, and I did, just not the way she expected. Instead of disinviting my family, I called them up and told them the party was cancelled. I said Claire wasn't feeling well. It was a lie that sat like lead in my throat, but it bought me time. I needed to think. I needed to plan, because something had shifted in me, and I wasn't going to let my silence be her shield anymore. She wanted perfection on Christmas. I'd give her something better, the truth, wrapped in velvet and served at room temperature. That week, I watched Claire prepare like we were hosting royalty. The caterers came in for a final tasting. She ordered personalized place cards in gold ink. Even the tree got redecorated to match her exact palette, gold, white and winter green. But through it all, I remained calm, attentive, even helpful. I asked about guest counts and RSVPs. I nodded at her choice of hors d'oeuvre. She thought she had won, but what she didn't know was that I'd made a second guest list, one that wasn't printed in gold ink. A list written from memory, with love. I kept everything quiet, polite, controlled. I didn't need to argue or make threats. That wasn't my style. I had spent my life learning how to solve problems by thinking ahead, by understanding the foundation before making the move. So I moved in silence, while Claire was focused on polishing the silverware and rehearsing her introductions to the Hanleys and Walcotts. I reached out to my family, one by one, with care. I called my sister first. No dress code, I told her. Wear whatever makes you feel comfortable. And bring your banana pudding, the one with the crushed vanilla wafers on top. Max's favorite. She hesitated, of course. I thought Claire said. I know what she said, I interrupted gently. But this year, you're coming, no matter what. Her voice broke when she agreed. I don't think it was just about Christmas. It was about being seen, being included, being respected. Next, I visited my parents, in person. My dad was on the porch, sharpening the snow shovel. My mum was inside, knitting something for Lily, a scarf with little snowflake patterns. I sat down at their old kitchen table, the same one I'd spilled apple juice on 100 times as a kid, and I told them the truth. Not the whole truth, not the ugliness of Claire's exact words, but enough for them to know that their presence mattered more than any social standing or wine pairing. My mum reached across the table, took my hand and said softly, "We'll come if you're sure it won't cause trouble for you." I nodded. It's time trouble learned where the boundaries are. Behind the scenes, I made quiet arrangements, rented a second tree, smaller but warm and colorful, with room for handmade ornaments and candy canes. Set it up in the den where the kids usually played. Ordered a second set of hors d'oeuvres from a small local bakery. Mini pot pies, deviled eggs, the kinds of things my family actually enjoyed. Even printed place cards myself using the kids' markers and folded index cards. They didn't sparkle like Claire's, but they were honest, and sometimes honesty makes things shine in a way glitter never can. Meanwhile, Claire kept going. She practiced how she'd introduce our home as transitional colonial meets modern sophistication. She coordinated the valet service, briefed the caterers, and even tried out 3 different tones of laughter in the mirror to match the different guest groups. I watched quietly as a woman mistook performance for connection. A woman who cared more about being impressive than being real. And I knew this party, her party, would be her stage, but I wasn't planning to interrupt her performance. I was simply preparing to hold up a mirror. By the time Christmas Eve arrived, the house looked like a magazine cover. Everything gleamed. The tree in the great room could have been in a department store window. Every fork was perfectly aligned, every wine label hand-selected. Claire was glowing. This was her moment. She looked at me and said, "Let's make it perfect." I smiled and kissed her cheek. "Let's make it unforgettable." And with that, I sent a quiet group text to my family. Door opens at 6:30. Enter through the den. No apologies, just love. Guests began arriving at 6 sharp. The driveway was lined with luxury cars, and soft jazz filtered through the entryway as champagne flutes clinked and laughter echoed through our marble foyer. Claire was in her element, floating from conversation to conversation, offering practiced compliments and curated smiles. She wore a sleek silver gown that shimmered under the chandeliers, and from the outside she looked like the perfect hostess. I stayed close by, offering drinks, greeting guests, and watching the door. At exactly 6:32, the side door to the den opened. My sister stepped in first, holding a casserole dish wrapped in a plaid kitchen towel. She wore her favorite forest green sweater with a Christmas brooch I gave her when we were kids. Behind her came my parents, my dad in his brown corduroy blazer, the one with the patched elbows, and my mom holding a tin of cookies tied with a red ribbon. Their eyes scanned the space with quiet caution, unsure if they were intruding or welcome. I stepped forward and pulled them into a hug. "You're right on time," I whispered. In the den, I'd set a long wooden table with simple decorations, pine cones, red candles, and paper snowflakes Max and Lily had made. My sister placed her casserole next to the deviled eggs. My mom added her cookies and smiled nervously. "This is beautiful, David," she said, "and it smells like home." Max and Lily came racing in moments later, shouting, "Grandma, Grandpa," and everything else faded. The warmth in that room was something the rest of the house didn't have. It wasn't styled or bought. It was lived. It was earned. Meanwhile, Claire was upstairs fixing a minor wardrobe issue, something about a clasp on her bracelet. She didn't see my family arrive. She didn't see the hugs or the laughter in the den. By the time she descended, guests were sipping wine and complimenting the Christmas decor. Claire floated back into her social orbit, completely unaware of the parallel celebration happening just one room away. I'd kept the 2 spaces separate, her party in the great room, my people in the den, but I knew eventually those worlds would collide, and I wanted it to happen naturally, not with drama, with truth. The moment came during the dessert hour. Claire was showing off the pastry tower, imported macarons, handcrafted tiramisu, and something she called deconstructed eggnog. One of our more casual guests, an old colleague from my firm, wandered into the den in search of a quieter space and stumbled into my parents. "Oh, hey, Mr. Mercer," he said cheerfully. "Didn't know you'd be here." My dad stood and shook his hand proudly, wouldn't miss it for the world. That moment created a ripple. People started to notice. Someone asked who decorated the den tree. Lily shouted, "Grandpa helped." Claire turned. I saw her freeze for just a second. Wine glass suspended mid-air. Smile faltering, but she quickly composed herself. "David," she said sweetly through clenched teeth as she approached me. "Can I speak with you privately for a moment?" I followed her to the butler's pantry. She closed the door behind us and turned to face me with fire in her eyes.
"You invited them?"
"After I specifically asked you not to." I kept my voice low and calm. "No, Claire. I didn't invite them to your party. I invited them to mine." Claire stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. "Your party?" she repeated, voice thick with disbelief. "David, this is our house, our event. You went behind my back." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply met her eyes and said, "I didn't go behind your back, Claire. I walked beside you the whole way. You were just too busy polishing the silver to notice." Her jaw clenched, and I could see her reaching for the right words, something to regain control, but I wasn't giving her that this time. I'd given her too many outs already. She turned away for a second, pressing her fingers against her temple. "They don't belong here, David. You know that." I took a step closer, not angry, just honest. "You mean they don't belong in your version of here, your curated, filtered, retouched version of what you want the world to think our lives look like? But they belong in my life. And this house is half mine. That den is mine. Those kids, ours. And they know exactly who their grandparents are. They should never feel like loving them is something to be hidden." She turned to face me again, her voice quieter now. I just didn't want to be embarrassed. There it was. The soft truth beneath all the hard edges. The fear of being judged by people who wear their approval like badges. "Embarrassed by what?" I asked. "My dad's calloused hands, my mum's outdated sweater, my sister's homemade casserole, or are you embarrassed that you married someone who came from them?" Her silence was loud, too loud. When we stepped out of the pantry, the air had changed. People had begun drifting between the great room and the den, drawn to the smell of real food, the sound of unfiltered laughter. My mum was passing out her lemon squares to a group of guests who clearly preferred them to the French petit four. My dad was showing Max how to fold a paper football. And my sister was teaching Lily's friend how to make snowflakes out of coffee filters. The contrast was stunning, perfection in one room, connection in the other. Claire watched it all unfold with eyes that didn't know where to land. Her polished guests were mingling with my family, complimenting the casserole, admiring the handmade ornaments, asking for cookie recipes. The two worlds were no longer separate, and somehow the party hadn't crumbled. It had come alive. Not louder, just warmer. Claire turned to me and whispered, "They're taking over." "No," I said gently. "They're filling in what was missing." We didn't argue again that night. She didn't make a scene or send anyone away. She didn't join the den crowd, but she didn't fight it either. Instead, she quietly poured herself a glass of wine, leaned against the kitchen counter, and watched the kind of Christmas she'd never planned for. A little one made of mismatched voices and overlapping stories and love that doesn't need a dress code. And I knew no matter what happened next, something had shifted. After the last guest left and the house had quieted, I found myself alone in the den. The lights on the smaller tree glowed softly. Empty plates sat on the wooden table, crumbs from deviled eggs and half-eaten lemon squares still scattered across the surface. I heard Claire's heels echo faintly in the hallway behind me, but I didn't turn around. I needed a minute with the silence, a minute with the truth. My family had shown up. with love, with humility, with zero expectation. And somehow, they had managed to transform the party without taking anything away from it, except maybe the illusion. Claire entered the room and stood beside me without saying anything. We both stared at the little tree. Max and Lily had hung their favorite ornaments on it. One's made of macaroni and glitter, bent candy canes, and a photograph of the four of us at last year's tree lot. She reached out almost absently and straightened one of the branches. "I thought it would be chaos," she finally said. "I thought they'd ruin everything." I nodded slowly. "But they didn't." She took a deep breath, as if realizing the air didn't smell like judgment after all. She turned to me. "Why didn't you tell me sooner that it meant so much to you?" My eyes met hers. "Because for years I was trying to fit into your world. I thought if I just kept quiet, you'd eventually make space for mine. But this time, you didn't ask me to compromise. You asked me to choose. And I did." There wasn't anger in my voice, just truth. Truth can sound cruel when someone's used to lies wrapped in courtesy, but I wasn't trying to hurt her. I was trying to be free. Claire sat down on the old couch next to the fireplace, the one I'd moved from my parents' basement when we bought this house. She looked smaller somehow, not physically, but emotionally. "Do you think they'll forgive me?" she asked. I considered it. They never held a grudge to begin with, but forgiveness starts with showing up. Not perfectly, just honestly. I didn't promise her reconciliation. I didn't sugarcoat the work ahead, but I saw something flicker in her, maybe regret, maybe awakening. I handed her a small wrapped box from under the den tree. She raised an eyebrow. "I thought we did gifts earlier." "We did," I said, "but this one's different." Inside was a framed photo, my family at Lily's birthday party earlier that year. Nothing fancy, just paper hats, backyard balloons, and joy. She stared at it for a long moment. "This isn't a test," I added softly. "You don't have to become someone you're not. But I need you to stop asking me to be someone I'm not, either." Claire nodded, her eyes a little glassy now. That night, she didn't make promises. She didn't suddenly fall in love with my roots or ask for my dad's chili recipe. But she did place that photo on our kitchen shelf the next morning, right between her Italian espresso set and the marble salt cellar, and that was enough to tell me something had begun to shift. Sometimes growth doesn't come in grand apologies. Sometimes it begins in silence, in presence, in sitting with what you once tried to push away. The days that followed passed quietly, like the dust that settles after a storm. Nothing dramatic happened. Claire didn't suddenly become warm toward my parents or send my sister a handwritten apology. But something in her softened. She didn't fight when Max asked to invite Grandpa to his basketball game the next weekend. She even reminded him to wear the team hoodie my mom had bought him. And when Lily insisted on bringing Grandma's cookies to her class party, Claire offered to pack them in a tin, not replace them with store-bought sweets. It was subtle, but it was there. We didn't talk about the party, not directly, but sometimes she'd look at the den as if remembering something she couldn't quite explain. There were moments when she seemed lost in thought, standing over the stove with a wooden spoon in her hand, staring out the kitchen window, or flipping through a home magazine, only to set it down mid-page. I didn't press. I'd said what I needed to say. The next part was up to her, and if she wanted to earn her way back into something real, I wasn't going to interfere with her process. One night, about a week into January, I came home to find Claire in the den. She was sitting on the old couch, legs tucked under her, surrounded by a few open photo albums, ones I hadn't seen her touch in years. They were filled with pictures from our earlier days, birthdays in our starter apartment, beach trips with my sister, Max's first Christmas in my parents' living room. She looked up when she heard me enter, You know, she said, I used to think this couch was ugly. I smiled gently, still might be. She laughed, soft, unguarded. Not the performative kind she used at charity dinners. But it's in every photo, she continued. It's always there in the background. This couch saw our whole life before the upgrades. Her voice caught slightly, and I miss parts of that. I miss us before we became something we thought we had to be. That was the first time she let the mask slip. The first time she looked at what we'd built and asked if we'd constructed something livable or just impressive. We sat there for a while, not speaking, just flipping through the pages. She rested her head on my shoulder. Do you think your mum would teach me how to make her lemon squares? She asked suddenly. I know it's late, but I think I'd like to try. I turned my head slowly toward her. She'd be honored, and probably shocked, I said, half joking. Claire smiled. Then maybe she and I can be surprised together. It wasn't a declaration, but it was a start. The beginning of something fragile and unfamiliar but honest. Rebuilding doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it comes in photo albums and lemon square recipes, in sitting still with the things you once overlooked. Claire wasn't perfect, and neither was I. But I could feel the foundation shifting away from performance toward presence, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough to hold us up again. By early February, something had undeniably changed. Not just between Claire and me, but in the atmosphere of our home. The air didn't feel quite so curated. Conversations weren't always measured or filtered. The kids laughed more freely, even around Claire, and she began asking questions that didn't feel rehearsed. She listened, really listened. When Lily showed her a drawing from school, Claire didn't correct the colors or suggest framing options. She just said, "Tell me about it." It was new and fragile, but real. Claire made the first move, a Sunday dinner invitation. She asked me if it would be weird to have my parents over. Not weird, I replied. A miracle, maybe. But not weird. She smiled nervously. Can you help me cook? I want to try your mum's meatloaf. And maybe her mashed potatoes. That Sunday, my parents arrived with wine. They could barely afford and dessert they'd made together that morning. Claire greeted them at the door, not with perfection, but with sincerity. She offered my mum an apron and asked for guidance. And for the first time, I saw my wife and my mother laugh in the same room. My dad told stories at the table. Nothing fancy, just little moments from my childhood. Claire didn't flinch or roll her eyes like she used to. She laughed, genuinely, even when he told the story of me getting stuck in the attic with a BB gun. My mum praised Claire's mashed potatoes. Claire said it was all in the coaching. And when dinner ended, Claire handed my mum a small notebook. Would you write down that lemon square recipe, she asked. I think it's time I got it right. My mum nodded, eyes shining in the way a mother's do when she realizes she's finally being seen. Later that night, when the dishes were done and the kids were asleep, I walked into the den and found Claire sitting by the fireplace again. This time, she was holding a single photo from the party. One Lily had snapped of my parents with their arms around Max and her, grinning, crumbs on their faces, joy written all over them. This is the kind of Christmas I want to remember, she said. I sat beside her. Then that's the kind we'll keep having. But it has to be both of us, Claire. It can't just be my family learning to fit in. It has to be you too. She nodded. I spent so many years trying to look like I belonged somewhere that I forgot what it feels like to actually belong. Her voice cracked a little. I was so afraid of being small, I became someone who made others feel smaller just to stay in control. I don't want that anymore, David. I want what we had, not what I tried to build by myself. She reached for my hand, And for the first time in years I felt like she meant it, not as an apology but as a choice, a conscious, humble decision to re-enter something real. That night we made a promise. No more separate lives inside the same house. No more silencing the parts of ourselves that didn't fit someone else's version of elegance. If we were going to move forward, it had to be together with all the messy, awkward, loud, loving parts included, the kind of life that doesn't always photograph well but feels like home when no one's watching. As the months passed, Claire's transformation was not instant, but it was consistent. She began to show up in ways that were quiet, but meaningful, not just with my family, but with the parts of herself she had long ignored. She stopped obsessing over appearances. She cancelled the monthly floral subscription and started growing herbs by the kitchen window. She swapped curated gallery walls for actual family photos, imperfections and all. And in those small decisions, I saw her learning how to live. Not for performance, but for presence. There were still moments of tension, of course. Change doesn't erase the past, it wrestles with it. One afternoon in April, Claire admitted that she had always felt out of place in her own family growing up. Everything had to be perfect, she said. There was no space for real emotions, so I built a version of myself that looked good, even if it didn't feel true. And when I married you, I carried that version into our home. I listened carefully, realizing for the first time that her rejection of my roots had less to do with my family and more to do with how terrified she was to face her own. Max and Lily seemed to notice the change too. They didn't articulate it, but you could feel it in the way they moved. There was less walking on eggshells, less hesitation before asking questions or bringing home imperfect crafts. One evening, Lily showed Claire a school project she'd made using cardboard and pipe cleaners. Claire didn't offer to fix it or suggest metallic paint to make it more presentable. She knelt beside her and said, "Tell me everything about it. I want to hear your whole process." Lily beamed, and I quietly watched a part of my wife that had been locked away finally begin to unfold. Summer came, and instead of booking an expensive resort, we rented a small cabin by the lake, just like the ones I used to visit as a kid. We cooked over fire pits, played board games, and skipped rocks until sunset. My parents joined us for the weekend. My sister brought her kids, and the cabin was filled with laughter and burnt marshmallows and shared stories. Claire sat next to my mom on the porch, asking for advice about homemade jam. That's when my sister looked at me and whispered, "You did something right." I didn't respond, I just watched. By the time fall rolled around, Claire was planning Thanksgiving. But this time, it wasn't about who would be impressed. It was about who would be fed, included, loved. She called my mom to ask for recipes, asked my sister what her kids liked to eat, and even asked Max and Lily if they wanted to make name cards for the table. The table didn't match, the chairs were borrowed, the turkey wasn't professionally brined. But no one cared, because everyone belonged, and no one had to earn their place. And then, one afternoon near December, I walked into the living room and saw Claire reading a card from last year, one my sister had given her, but she'd never opened. It said simply, "You may not understand us yet, but you don't have to. Just try. We'll meet you there." I watched her read it again and press it to her chest. And I realized, sometimes grace takes a year to sink in. But once it does, it blooms in the most unexpected places. Christmas arrived again, but this time everything felt different. Not because the house was less decorated or the menu simpler, but because we weren't pretending. There was no guest list curated to impress. No speeches crafted to hide the cracks, just family. Claire insisted we use the den as the main gathering space this year. She and Lily hung paper snowflakes across the window, and Max helped Grandpa set up the tree. Claire didn't bark directions or rearrange the ornaments when no one was looking. She let it be real. she let it be theirs. The morning of the party, I found her sitting on the floor in front of the fireplace, wrapping presents in brown paper and twine. "I used to think luxury was found in the way something looked," she said. "Now I see it's in how something feels." She held up a handmade card Max had drawn for my mum, grinning from ear to ear. "This feels like more than anything I used to put in a box with a ribbon." I sat beside her and kissed her cheek. "You found it," I whispered. "Home." When my family arrived, there was no hesitation. No side door, no whispered instructions. Claire opened the front door herself, arms open, smile, honest. She hugged my sister tightly and complimented her earrings. Not because they were expensive, but because she'd actually noticed them. She asked my mom if she'd brought her lemon squares again, and my dad if he'd brought his stories. The dining room buzzed with voices that weren't filtered, rehearsed or polished, just loved, just heard. After dinner, we sat by the fire and opened presents. Max gave his grandparents framed photos he'd taken on our lake trip. Lily wrote Claire a letter that said, "You're not just pretty, you're kind now." Claire read it aloud, then hugged her so tightly I thought she might never let go. There were tears, of course, but they were the kind that water something, not the kind that break you. And when I looked around that room, at the mismatched socks, the lopsided gingerbread house, the laughter that refused to be quiet, I realized we had arrived. Later that night, after the kids were asleep and the dishes stacked high, Claire and I stood in the kitchen. No one said anything for a long time. Then she turned to me and said, "Thank you for not letting me lose what I didn't know I needed." I nodded. "Thank you for finding your way back." We didn't toast. We didn't declare anything. We just stood there, hand in hand, in the mess of a life well lived, a life reclaimed. So if you've ever been told your people aren't enough, that they don't belong, that their clothes or words or jobs or ways aren't sophisticated enough, remember this: real love never needs translation. It doesn't need to be corrected, upgraded, or hidden. It just needs to be invited in. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is open the door.